Chapter 71, A Moment of Grace Before the Prelude of Assassination. After spending an entire day preparing, Han Shao and Phoebe took a carriage at dusk to the Boost Merchant Guild in the southern part of the city. Han Shao and Phoebe sat shoulder to shoulder within the carriage. Two primitively simplistic crossbows decorated with intricate carvings were placed in front of the two. In addition to this, there was a dagger that sparkled with cold light. This crossbow and dagger will be of much better quality than the ones you obtained from the Orc Wolf Riders last time. I'm giving all of these to you for free. Phoebe held a clean piece of silk in her hands, carefully wiping away at the longsword in her hands as she spoke coldly to Han Shao. Han Shao played with the crossbow and dagger in his hands, so delighted with them that he could hardly bear to put them down. He was quite satisfied with Phoebe's generosity and said with a light laugh, "Don't count on me too much for this operation. I'm not as strong as you think I am. My main purpose is to keep a lookout and act as your supporting assistant. You're still going to be the one who has to take action. I know, just listen to my orders later. I'll be telling you what to do then." Phoebe rolled her eyes at Han Shao and said with some anger. Han Shao took out a small bottle from within his space ring and carefully poured some powder onto his fingertip, very cautiously coating the tips of both the dagger and crossbow bolts. He hastily and repeatedly cleaned the fingertip that had been covered by the powder. Phoebe was a bit curious about Han Shao's actions and slightly shifted her body closer to where he was sitting, proceeding to stare at and observe his actions for quite a while. She finally asked, seemingly perplexed, "What are you doing?" A strand of fragrance similar to the scent of orchids wafted into Han Shao's mouth and nose as Phoebe moved closer to him. He involuntarily flicked a glance at her as his heart suddenly lurched. Phoebe was like Han Shao today, dressed in tight-fitting black nighthawker clothes. The tight nighthawker clothing caused Phoebe's marvelous body to become visible without a doubt. She had a pair of exquisitely chiseled cheeks and stunning beauty which blossomed from the movement of her clear eyes, all of which caused Han Shao to have a heart like a capering monkey and a mind like a galloping horse. "I already have Finny. Although this Phoebe is pretty, her personality is too cold and she comes with too much dangerous baggage," Han Shao said silently to himself and turned his head away afterwards, continuing to concentrate on coating the dagger and crossbow bolts. He responded diffidently, "Nothing much, just applying some poison powder to my weapons." "Despicable, shameless. This goes against the regulations of the Empire. If anyone were to know of your actions, you would be in great trouble." Phoebe's face was full of contempt as she spoke coldly. "Doesn't matter. What we're about to do today isn't the most honorable task anyways. Besides, no one will find out about this. Hey, you're my accomplice and even I don't believe that you're dumb enough to rat yourself out." Han Shao cackled a low evil laugh as he spoke with a trace of pride. Phoebe was a bit suffocated by her anger upon hearing Han Shao's words, but since she had looked to him for help she could only snort coldly and couldn't say much else. When Han Shao had applied poison powder to all the crossbow bolt and his dagger, he thought for a moment and pulled a few iron needles from his thigh. He spared no trouble and was exceedingly patient as he also applied the same poison powder to the iron needles. Phoebe once again snorted lightly, seeming to hold Han Shao's methods in high contempt. When he'd settled everything appropriately, Han Shao put away all his weapons and looked at Phoebe, asking, "Right, why are you not directly attacking Grover and are attempting to kill his two ineffectual lackeys instead?" "Grover has some critical items belonging to the guild in his possession. He's put those items in a trusted mistress. If Grover dies, his mistress is sure to publicly reveal those items. This would be of destructive impact to us. So before I kill Grover, I must find his mistress first and regain control of those items." Phoebe glanced sideways at Han Shao, explaining with some reluctance. "The larger a merchant guild was, the more likely shady dealings would occur. Take the resources that Han Shao had seized from the Orc Wolf Riders for example. These items had originally belonged to the shops of the town of Zhou. The Empire had long since had an official regulation that if citizens obtained such resources they must be turned in. Fabian and Han Shao's transaction had already violated the Empire's regulations. If the Empire Empire were to find out about the methods of the Boost Merchant Guild, the guild was sure to find it hard to escape their inevitable punishment. For a guild like the Boost Merchant Guild, there were surely more similarly illegal transactions. It looked like this critical matters was handled by Grover. No wonder Phoebe didn't dare to act trashly against Grover. The two discussed some of the details in low voices until the horse carriage suddenly stopped unbeknownst to anyone. The groom at the front said softly, "Miss, we've arrived at the back door of the guild. Let's go." Phoebe glanced at Han Sha-oh and took the lead in alighting. Han Sha-oh poked his head out to look around and then hopped off as well. "Miss, hurry inside. Be careful. Grover has just taken a few strong men and left the guild. I don't know where they've gone. They always return at the end of the night." An old man in the Boost Merchant Guild was guarding the back door and hastily turned his body to the side to allow Phoebe and Han Sha-oh to enter when he saw them arrive. "We've caused you to go to great efforts," Phoebe said to the old man. She glanced at Han Sha-oh as they rushed inside the guild. Han Sha-oh followed tightly behind Phoebe as he too quickly moved forward. "Although the guild is mostly controlled by Grover's men, I can mobilize a few older men, and this is all because Grover isn't aware of my relationship with them. There are many guards inside, so we must be careful and cautious. Otherwise, not only will the assassination fail if we are discovered, but it would be hard to even escape with our lives." Phoebe was exceedingly familiar with the Boost Merchant Guild as she evaded quite a few areas with guards when she led Han Sha-oh with a fast pace. She didn't forget to remind Han Sha-oh during this time. It was completely dark now. There was no moon tonight, and thick layers of dark-colored clouds completely absorbed all light. The few lights along the hallways of the Boost Merchant Guild were unable to shine out too far. Phoebe had the strength of a sword master all right. Her agile body greatly surprised Han Sha-oh. Her body flew soundlessly and her speed was exceedingly fast. His magical yuan churning madly. Han Sha-oh was greatly astounded by the extraordinariness of his senses when he calmed down. The Black Knight was completely unable to obstruct his range of vision. Even without the illumination of lights, Han Sha-oh could clearly see the fish swimming in the pools beneath the artificial mountains in the far distance. He could also clearly hear the footsteps coming from quite a distance away and the rustlings of low voices within passing rooms. Han Sha-oh's calm walk was also agile and fast beyond comparison. He was like a hunting cheetah searching for his prey, following soundlessly behind Phoebe. Suddenly Han Sha-oh quickly approached and grabbed Phoebe, abruptly hauling her body and stuffing themselves into a crack in the surrounding artificial mountains. The crack in the artificial mountains was exceedingly narrow and their chests were tightly mashed against each other as they squeezed inside. Han Sha-oh could feel the fully rounded peaks in front of Phoebe's chest. Her charming face was infuriated as she glared fiercely at Han Sha-oh, her eyes seeming like they could spit out fire. SHH. Extending a finger to make a silencing motion, Han Sha-oh's eyes rolled rapidly, indicating to Phoebe that there was an unexpected situation. The wrath on Phoebe's face still didn't dissipate upon Han Sha-oh's actions. A trace of bashful red flooded Phoebe's slender white neck and nape. Their two thighs were somewhat enmeshed and rubbing against each other. They could even feel each other's heartbeat through their connecting chests. A strand of ambiguous atmosphere started to emanate between the two of them. Seemingly too shy to look at Han Sha-oh, Phoebe's cheek made its way next to Han Sha-oh's ear as she said in an incredibly low voice, her breath like orchids, "I will kill you if there isn't anything going on." Han Sha-oh's expression was wry as he regulated his breathing and concentrated, not saying anything. He felt the exceedingly light footsteps draw near. His breathing became slower and he even slightly shook his head, wanting to warn Phoebe of danger. Who knew that because Phoebe was pursing her jade lips in a low whisper to Han Sha-oh, Han Sha-oh's shake of his head actually caused Phoebe's tantalizing lips to directly plaster themselves onto Han Sha-oh's cheeks. Just as Phoebe's breathing was uneasy and about to erupt into rage, Han Sha-oh turned his head with extreme difficulty and used a very resolute gaze to tell Phoebe to be careful. Phoebe had the training of a sword master after all, and the strength of her mental state was quite strong. She merely inhaled a deep breath at this critical moment and immediately calmed her rapidly beating heart. However, Because of her deep breath, the full peaks in front of her chest involuntarily lifted, rising so that Han Shao almost lost control and moaned. My windscreen truly felt a disturbance and I came here at the fastest speed possible. Why didn't I discover anything? Have I been too careful lately? The murmuring sound of a man talking to himself sounded out not too far away from the two. Exceedingly light footsteps only slowly sounded in the vicinity after the voice came into earshot. If Phoebe hadn't raised her concentration to the utmost, it would have been exceedingly difficult to detect these footsteps unless the man had been quite close by. Since he was a wind mage, he could indeed use enhancement magics of the wind major to greatly decrease the weight of his body. His walking speed would be faster than normal mages and warriors, and his footsteps would be even more lithe with no sound. No wonder that even with Phoebe's strength as a sword master, she was able to detect his movement only after he drew near. This person surveyed the surroundings, finally departing without a sound while Han Shao and Phoebe remained on tenterhooks. However, Phoebe didn't dare take reckless actions this time. She was deathly afraid that her judgment would be flawed. Her pair of clear eyes bore straight into Han Shao as if wishing to gain some clues from Han Shao's face. After a while, Han Shao exhaled lightly and said lowly, "He's gone." As soon as his voice sounded, Phoebe used her hands and legs together to firmly squirm out from the crack of the artificial mountains. She lowered her head and said lightly with a fierce tone, "I'll let it pass this time, but the next time something like this occurs, find a more spacious place, otherwise I won't let you off." Phoebe circled around the area after she'd finished speaking and was about to head in another direction. She walked 2 steps and realized that Han Shao was smiling wryly, having yet to catch up. She stuck her hands on her waist and lightly rebuked, "You don't want the black gold or any more?" "Coming, Han," she responded, and followed with some resignation, thinking, "When can I find a spacious hiding place when things go south?" They didn't meet with any more unexpected twists afterwards. Phoebe led Han Shao on a longer path, avoiding a few waves of guards and finally making it into Darnell and Yuna's room. "Let's set things up, make our preparations, and wait for this dog couple to come back," Phoebe immediately spoke through gritted teeth upon entering the room, seeming to want to vent her frustrations from earlier on the two of them. Therefore Han Shao and Phoebe started working busily, preparing to assassinate Grover's loyal lackeys who were about to return. Chapter 72, an alarmingly breathtaking completion of an assassination. Phoebe and Han Shao had set up the room accordingly after a while. "Why were you able to so miraculously discover traces of the wind mage Ellis when he made his way over?" Phoebe creased her brow, perplexed, and looked at Han Shao in inquiry as she was inspecting the inside of the room. Han Shao was stooped close to the ground at this moment and carefully collected some sawdust from scraps of wood. He conscientiously stored it within his space ring and responded without lifting his head, "This is my business and has nothing to do with you." Snorting lightly, Phoebe shut her mouth but couldn't help but observe Han Shao's actions. After a while, she gave an involuntary cry of astonishment. "Were you a killer before? How come you are so steady and cautious right now and even possess such extraordinary perception?" If it was Han Shao's original personality, he naturally wouldn't face any matter with such a steady and cautious mentality, but his magical training forced him to continually exist in a state of enduring inhumane pain, unconsciously creating Han Shao's firm and indomitable personality. After the trials of the Dark Forest and Claude's death, Han Shao's careful prudence and steadiness had been unconsciously and soundlessly trained into being. Add to that his extraordinary perception. This truly gave Han Shao the characteristics of a professional killer. No wonder Phoebe would dare to ask, "No, do you think I'm you?" "Tonight I've been operating under your watchful instructions ever since we entered the guild up until our preparations just now. I think that you certainly wouldn't have grasped such methods if it weren't for certain experiences. Looks like you were the one who was a killer before, otherwise why would you be so well practiced?" Han Shao finally cleared the sawdust from the bed panels and raised his head to rake Phoebe with his eyes. "You're the one who was a killer before." Phoebe rolled her eyes coldly at Han Shao. She continued to say, "However, My honored master has passed on to me knowledge of these matters. The particulars of assassinating someone was also one of my required subjects of study. Oh, looks like your master was a very proficient killer, Han Sha-oh said diffidently. Shut your mouth, don't you dare slander my honored master. My honored master is a true swordsman. He wouldn't do such things. Phoebe's face was even colder as she glared ferociously at Han Sha-oh. It was at this moment that faint footsteps could be heard approaching from afar. Han Sha-oh's brow knitted as he carefully discerned them. He said to Phoebe, they should be coming back, I can hear them. Phoebe also focused on her hearing and listened. She only heard the sound of footsteps draw near a few breaths after Han Sha-oh's warning had sounded. She looked at him in shock and said in a low voice, no matter how strong or weak your strength is, you're already quite frightening just based on your foresight and extraordinary senses. Han Sha-oh didn't respond and moved according to Phoebe's earlier instructions. He crouched down, turned to the side and rolled underneath the bed. Upon seeing that Han Sha-oh was in position, Phoebe scanned the four corners of the room with her beautiful eyes and suddenly sprang upwards. Leveraging the chandelier in the room, she hid herself in the shadows of the rafters. Holding his breath and concentrating, Han Sha-oh slowed down the frequency of his breaths and heart rate until he appeared to be dead. His mind completely clear, Han Sha-oh rifled through his mind, going over the items they had set up in the room once more in his mind, then placing all of his concentration on the people arriving. At this moment footsteps sounded at a volume in which even normal people could hear. The coy laughter of a man and woman flirting sounded from far out the room door, accompanied by various sounds of them making out. The room door creaked open as the two of them slowly walked in, slowly approaching the bed under which Han Sha-oh was concealed. Darling, were you feeling that itchy today that you had to be so wild at the banquet tonight? Who's caught your eye now? Darnell laughed softly as he teased Yuna. What's my business is mine. Are you a beast that only knows how to think with your lower body? You only have that BTCH Phoebe in your heart now. If it wasn't for you wanting to do something last time, we would have completed Grover's mission and killed that BTCH. Her guards got there in time because of your mistake. We almost didn't get out in time. Yuna berated Darnell. She'd already sat down on the edge of the bed. Hey, her skin is as smooth as silk and her face seems like it was exquisitely sketched by a painter. It's said that she hasn't had a man yet. Wouldn't it be such a pity for her if such a beauty doesn't experience the manliness of my strength before she dies? Darnell leered. At this moment Han Sha-oh's concentration had been raised to the utmost. Although Darnell and Yuna couldn't detect Phoebe waiting in ambush, Han Sha-oh could hear her heartbeat and breathing quicken. It looked like she was exceedingly furious. He gave an internal start of surprise and concealed himself even more carefully, ready to act in case Phoebe sprang the ambush earlier than planned. Damn Bletcher, you'll die beneath the crotch of a woman someday. Hey, I'll let you die beneath my crotch first. The shifting sounds of clothes being taken off slowly spread throughout the room, mixed in with Darnell's depraved laughter and Yuna's light panting sounds. Sucking and kissing sounds followed after as Darnell's depraved laughter and Yuna's moans grew louder and louder. The wooden bed above Han Sha-oh's head became a small boat in the midst of large waves as it rocked endlessly. A wailing moan like someone crying suddenly emerged from Yuna's mouth, followed by the sounds of repeated smacking sounds and heavy pans filling the ears, mixed in with Yuna's uncontrollable wails in between. Beneath the bed, Han Sha-oh could hear the sounds from above and could feel the bed swaying. He knew without needing to see that the depraved couple above him had started their battle. His blood boiling, Han Sha-oh couldn't help but imagine the scene going on just above him, and he desperately wanted to climb out and take a good look. His body had long since uncontrollably risen in a certain male fashion. An exceedingly light breathing sound came within Han Sha-oh's earshot. He started and immediately detected that this sound came from Phoebe, who was still up in the rafters. He wondered if she was furious or also similarly affected. Han Sha-oh could only hear the sounds from beneath the bed, whereas Phoebe had to continuously keep an eye on the two. She probably had caught a huge eyeful of their motions, because even the slightest break in concentration wouldn't be allowed during an assassination operation. Phoebe couldn't even move her gaze away from the two. According to Darnell's words, Phoebe was still a maiden. pain. This type of stimulus was probably more effective to her than to Han Shao, who was stuck underneath the bed and unable to see anything that was going on. After a while, just as Han Shao noticeably heard Phoebe's breathing hitch higher and was afraid that she would be unable to further conceal herself, but the movements of the depraved couple above him became more and more intense. Enormous panting and moaning sounds grew louder as the movement of the bed frame grew bigger. Things had obviously reached the climax. Just at this moment a light sound pierced the air. Han Shao's entire body tensed when it sounded, immediately knowing that Phoebe had already made her move. He focused all the concentration in his body. "Ow!" Yuna cried out in pain and abruptly yelled out, "Assassin!" Before Yuna has even finished saying the word assassin, the dagger in Han Shao's hand was already aimed at a hole that had been previously bored through the bed frame, and he stabbed it ferociously through the hole. A ghastly wail 10 times more desolate than Yuna's suddenly sounded out from Darnell's mouth like a pig being slaughtered. The minds of the two quickly cleared up from the original heights that they had almost scaled. They screamed continuously as they jumped from the bed and made for the room outside. The cries of agony never once ceased to flow from their mouths. Han Shao had already rolled out from beneath the bed after his stab. He raised his head to see that Phoebe's body was enveloped by the black night ocker cloak and that a ball of milky white aura was flaring out from the longsword in her hand. The ball of aura was lustrous and brilliant in the dimness of the room. It dazzled so brightly that one could barely keep their eyes open, and it closed in on Darnell and Yuna, who were attempting to make their escape. Han Shao lifted the crossbow in his hand and realized that both were completely naked when he aimed and fired at Darnell. There was already a crossbow bolt stuck on Yuna's snow-white left thigh, and she gritted her teeth with pain as she moved. Her body was obviously not as agile as before. Darnell was even worse off, as the lower half of his body was a mess of blood and flesh. He wore a devastated expression of tragedy, wailing continuously like a wolf. Who would have thought that this dagger would stab directly into Darnell's private parts? No wonder his cries were a lot more desolate than Yuna's. Han Shao thought in happy viciousness. The crossbow bolt flew out like lightning and shot towards Darnell's back. Darnell could actually still detect the danger from behind him when he was in the throes of horror and fright. Dark green light flared from the longsword he had long since wielded and demolished Han Shao's crossbow bolt with an abrupt spin. A wall of water suddenly appeared after a hastily muttered incantation. The dark blue wall of water enveloped their two heads and turned Phoebe's milky white fighting aura into a sky full of rain watering their two bodies. But the appearance of this wall of water was timely and won a few seconds of time for the two. The two screamed and ran for the outside of the room, but halfway through the room the hanging chandelier suddenly crashed down, forcing Darnell to halt his stabs again and smash the chandelier to the side. Phoebe had already descended from the rafters by this time, and Han Shao had just fired his crossbow. They rushed the two at the same time like cheetahs. Phoebe had planned on finishing off Darnell, but displayed a trace of panic and disgust when she saw his naked body. She shifted her sights and longsword to Yuna. The crossbow in Han Shao's hand fired again and was then flung to the side. Just when Darnell had demolished the crossbow bolt, Han Shao's dagger was already rushing to greet him. Darnell had already sunken into a crazed frenzy, and due to the pain and heartache of losing his manhood, he increased his fighting aura to the maximum and clashed with Han Shao's dagger. PFFSHT. A mouthful of fresh blood splurted out as Darnell's wild fighting aura rushed into Han Shao's body. Although he had the restraints of the magical yuan, it still wasn't enough to fully defend against it. Han Shao stumbled a few steps backwards after that clash. Upon seeing Han Shao hastily retreat after clashing with his sword, Darnell wanted to crazily pursue Han Shao, but he suddenly discovered that the longsword in his hand was boiling hot and that the skin of the right hand that was grasping the sword was suffering from extreme burning pain. He immediately flung out the longsword in his shock. "Hurry and run!" Yuna called out at this moment. A water serpent had appeared at some time and had surrounded Phoebe, attacking fiercely. Except part of its body would be severed whenever Phoebe waved her sword, turning into watery mist before it even hit the floor. Darnell glared viciously at Han Shao but didn't pursue him further. He covered his lower body with his left hand and continued rushing out the door. At this moment Han Shao Sha'o's ears caught the sound of faint footsteps coming from afar. Agitated internally, he once again rushed towards the two. Phoebe had also destroyed the water serpent by now and chased the two with speed that was on par with Han Sha'o's. Han Sha'o and Phoebe both understood that if they didn't kill these two now, they would no longer have the chance to once they left the room. Therefore they strived with all their might to keep the two in the room. At this moment a prearranged prop was curiously effective. Han Sha'o had made some modifications to the table legs of a round table set in front of the door. In their unparalleled haste, the two didn't circle around the round table but actually leaped towards it, intending to use it as a lever to quickly leave the room. The unexpected happened. Their two bodies landed on the table and the table legs all broke with a sharp crack as they were unable to hold the weight of the two bodies that had suddenly landed on it. The two of them had already used all their strength to begin with, planning on using the table as a stepping stone to push off of, but the table collapse caused their bodies to lose balance. With a sudden lack of a support, their bodies followed the table in a wobbly fall. Han Sha'o and Phoebe had both arrived at this moment. Phoebe's sword stabbed out her aura, already enclosing the two. The two had just regained their balance when they saw that they had been fully surrounded by Phoebe's fighting aura. Darnell suddenly pulled Yuna, and under her terrified and panic-stricken eyes thrust her straight into Phoebe's attack. He didn't even turn back to look at Yuna, as he gave no second thoughts about anything else, rushing out of the room. However, the poison powder that Han Sha'o had applied to the dagger finally took effect. Darnell's footsteps suddenly became as heavy as 1,000 tons after he took 2 steps. Han Sha'o swiftly closed the distance before he had time to react and waved the dagger again, taking his life. After killing Darnell, Han Sha'o's eyes fell on the space ring on Darnell's fingers. He reached his hand out for it but felt that it took a bit of effort to do so. Time was of the essence, and Han Sha'o ended up chopping off Darnell's middle finger with a slash of the dagger. He put away the finger with the space ring and turned his head to see that a bloody hole had opened in Yuna's chest. Phoebe seemed to have killed her. "Let's go," Han Sha'o called out softly, rushing to Phoebe's side. A light fragrance suddenly emanated from Yuna and Phoebe's direction. Han Sha'o took in a breath but paid it no heed. He only saw that the look in Phoebe's eyes were a bit strange and rushed at the girl who was staring off into space. He used the same method to break off the ring finger on Yuna's left hand, taking her space ring as well. He grabbed the crossbows that had been discarded with a smooth motion and grabbed Phoebe, and with a mighty leap, using a hole that had opened in the roof previously, and made their escape along the roof. Chapter 73, Pervert, what have you done to me? Around midnight, Han Sha'o and Phoebe had just left when Grover brought a pack of Boost Merchant Guild guards and barged into the room. "Who did it? Who did it? I've spent so many gold coins to keep you guys in vain. Not a single one of you discovered that an assassin had snuck in. If the target was me, then it likely wouldn't be those two on the ground." Grover immediately started bawling furiously upon entering the room, yelling at the people behind him. "Mr. Grover, this assassin was very proficient. He managed to avoid my wind wall and assassinated both Darnell and Yuna in such a short amount of time. This proves that the killer's strength is absolutely beyond our imagination." A mage with long hair and a somewhat ugly expression said to Grover after observing for a while. Exhaling lightly, Grover looked at the long-haired mage and said in an apologetic tone, "My apologies, Ellis, I was a bit out of line." The wind mage Ellis was still expressionless and looked at the dead Darnell's left hand with some surprise. He went and walked up to the body, noticing that the left hand was missing a finger. Ellis asked, perplexed. "The left middle finger on which Darnell wears his space ring has been chopped off. What's going on?" "Not only Darnell but Yuna as well. Could it be that this killer killed them because he wanted to rob them?" Grover was also a bit confused and asked after hearing Ellis' words. "Impossible." Ellis denied decisively and looked around the surroundings, explaining, "If the assassins wished to kill them for the sole purpose of robbing them, then he never would have picked these two, because the two of them together are the most difficult to fight against. Not to mention there are many valuable items within the guild. If he only wanted valuables, he wouldn't have needed to do anything to them. With the abilities demonstrated by the killer, he absolutely could have obtained more from the guild without making a single sound." Grover thought for a bit after his words and nodded. He said with a darkened face, "If he wasn't in it to murder for gain, then it must have been thanks to my dear niece Phoebe. It seems like she finally couldn't bear it longer after enduring things for so long." Indeed, Phoebe must be behind this. Darnell and Una both tried to assassinate Phoebe once. Although they retreated when they didn't succeed, I feel that Phoebe must know that it was the two of them. After all, Darnell's gaze towards Phoebe was simply too lecherous and unique. Even I, an outsider, could tell. As the one involved, Phoebe must have had an even better understanding of things. The fact that we're fine and they're the only ones who have died is enough to explain things. Except it seems that the killer is a bit greedy. Otherwise he wouldn't have remembered to take their space rings in such dangerous circumstances. When did such a character appear beside Phoebe? Ellis furrowed his brow and said slowly while turning things over in his mind. Grover started and mused deeply for a while. His face suddenly darkened and he said coldly, "I know who. It must be that Brian who killed those 3 assassins from Shadow Ghost a while back. I heard the guards say that this person came to do some business with Fabian and thus needed some money. Since his strength is enough to kill 3 of the senior swordsmen sent by Shadow Ghost, then he would have the strength to kill Darnell and Una. Damn it, how did Phoebe get her hands on this kid? I don't know where Phoebe's hidden him. He hasn't appeared by Phoebe's side since he left the guild last time. I've sent people to surveil where he is but have still been unable to find traces of him. This will be quite difficult." Nodding, Ellis concluded, "Looks like it is him. I think we should get rid of this person first at all costs. Otherwise we may be killed by him in due time. I'll write pass my orders on not to kill Phoebe for now. Put forth all effort into finding this person. He's ruined my plans twice and I'm going to make his existence a living hell." Grover's face was sinister as he spoke coldly. At this moment Hansha, deeply hated by Grover, had already brought Phoebe far away from the Boost Merchant Guild and was rushing towards Phoebe's quarters in the northern part of the city. Something was odd with Phoebe as she seemed a bit out of it. Her body was sluggish and hot to the touch. Han-Sha-Oh was dragging her in his haste to cover a distance. The two of them were dressed in night ochre clothes and chose to thread through small alleyways in the dark of the night, staying completely out of sight. But as they neared the northern part of the city guards started appearing more frequently, forcing Han-Sha-Oh to continuously hide and evade. Phoebe had still known to make good time when dragged behind Han-Sha-Oh, but at this moment her steps started to drag as her body grew hotter and hotter. With no alternatives, Han-Sha-Oh flung Phoebe onto his back, completely disregarding whether or not she agreed. In order to avoid the attention of the city guard, Han-Sha-Oh temporarily gave up his idea to send Phoebe back to her quarters and took her to the cemetery behind the Babylon Academy of School and Magic instead. It was the quietest place he knew and no one patrolled there. Add to that Han-Sha-Oh was exceedingly familiar with the area, and that was why this was the first place he thought of in a time of crisis like this. When Han-Sha-Oh had circled past the northern part of the city with Phoebe on his back and made it past some narrow roads into a forest patch, he suddenly felt that Phoebe on his back was tearing at her own clothes and her two hands were roving unconsciously over Han-Sha-Oh's body. Astonished, Han-Sha-Oh's body suddenly stopped. After relaxing, Han-Sha-Oh could clearly feel the well-rounded mounds in front of Phoebe's chest pressed against his back, the wondrous sensation of them closely mashed against his well-defined back. A blaze of fire suddenly ignited from his chest, uncontrollable like the sparks of a fire. Add to that Phoebe's restless hands were still unconsciously moving all over Han-Sha-Oh's chest, and it finally grew so stimulating that Han-Sha-Oh could no longer control himself. He swung Phoebe down from his back and suddenly held her marvelous body in his hands. He thrust Phoebe's body onto a tree nearby and Han-Sha-Oh's two hands moved in tandem, kneading the forbidden areas of Phoebe's body. Even with the night ochre clothes separating them, Han-Sha-Oh could feel the wondrous curves of Phoebe's bodies. Her well-rounded chest kept changing shape beneath Han-Sha-Oh's ministrations, and when his hand roamed over Phoebe's slender legs and pert bottom, the amazing strong stimulus attacked Han-Sha-Oh's senses, making him want to experience it even deeper. Phoebe had yanked her own face mask off, and at this moment her eyes were glassy, filled with a tempting lure of desire. Her stunningly beautiful face burned to the touch and brought within a heart-leaping beauty. The faint fragrance emitted by the breaths between her open mouth made Han-Sha-Oh's heart caper like a monkey and mind gallop like a horse. He was about to lose himself in it entirely. Han-Sha-Oh's right hand tore off a piece of Phoebe's night ochre outfit near the chest. The snow-white expanse of her breasts immediately blossomed in front of Han-Sha-Oh's eyes, along with a dot of pinkish red. Han-Sha-Oh finally couldn't contain himself and he lost control of the strength in his right hand. "Oh! Ow! At this moment a small feeble protest came out from Phoebe's small mouth. Her beautiful brows quirked vaguely because of the pain coming from her breast, finally unconsciously mouthing a weak sign of pain. Calmness blindsiding his mind, Han Shao abruptly came to his senses. When he looked at Phoebe he also recalled that he too had taken in a breath of that odd scent earlier. He immediately understood that Phoebe had fallen victim to an aphrodisiac, and also reflected that his loss of rational thought was likely because he had taken in a breath of the same toxin. His thoughts spinning furiously, Han Shao measured up his potential gains and losses and resolutely gathered Phoebe in his arms again, furiously dashing out to the front. Han Shao was very familiar with this area and came to a winding creek after not too long. The creek was quite narrow and he wasn't sure where it led to either, but he knew that this river was very shallow due to often frequenting in the area. As soon as he reached the river, Han Shao walked directly into the water, still holding Phoebe. Because it was almost winter, the weather was exceedingly frigid. The river waters were even more icy in the middle of the night, and when Han Shao carried Phoebe into the water and splashed some water onto her head, Phoebe suddenly sneezed a few times. Han Shao also submerged his head into water, and when the ice-cold water covered his head it chilled his previous urges. His body's reactions also completely calmed down. Achoo! Achoo! After Phoebe sneezed a few times, her mind slowly came back to her senses due to the effects of the cold river water. When she spat the cold water out of her mouth, the blush on her cheeks slowly disappeared and her glassy stare slowly disappeared. Where is this? Why I am here? Achoo! Phoebe looked around in confusion and sneezed again. When she lowered her head to sneeze, Phoebe abruptly realized that the two well-rounded peaks of her chest were exposed to the night air. The snow-white expanse of her skin and the dots of red at the peak greatly affected Phoebe. Han Shao's face had already suffered from a slap. Phoebe's face held anger that was almost madness in its ferocity as she screamed shrilly at Han Shao. Pervert, what have you done to me? Han Shao truly did feel a bit apologetic towards Phoebe at this moment, and he stammered, unable to speak clearly as he gazed upon a girl who was about to lose her mind. Phoebe suddenly broke out in loud sobs when she saw Han Shao's reaction, instantly losing her usual cold arrogance and demureness. She gave no thought to anything else and began beating at Han Shao with her fists and feet. Water splashed every which way in the creek and drenched Han Shao, but because Phoebe had suffered from such a great shock at this moment that she seemed to have completely forgotten that she was a strong sword master, she was more like a bad-tempered shrew, beating Han Shao in a disorganized fashion without any fighting aura whatsoever. If Phoebe had used fighting aura with her strength as a sword master, even with Han Shao's small accomplishments in magic, would cause him to be gravely injured if not dead after her string of blows, but these types of attacks felt like scratching an itch when they landed on Han Shao's strong body, not hurting in the slightest. Han Shao endured Phoebe's venting with a wry expression. When the strength behind her fists decreased more and more and she herself became tired, Han Shao laughed tryly. We were both under the influence of an aphrodisiac, but your body is still clean. Phoebe came to her senses after Han Shao spoke and halted the motions of her hands. She stood in front of Han Shao with a distance spanning 2 fists, sizing him up with slightly puffy eyes as if afraid to endure another shock. Her voice trembled as she asked, truly, you really didn't do that to me? Nodding his head firmly, Han Shao held up his right hand in resignation and solemnly promised her, I swear that I really didn't do anything inappropriate to you. A trace of relieved joy suddenly appeared on Phoebe's beautiful tear-streaked face. She was about to open her mouth and say something when she suddenly saw the nudity of her chest and hastily pulled the night talker outfit up, covering her naked breasts. She lifted a head full of anger and glared at Han Shao, roaring lowly through gritted teeth, then can you explain to me why the front of my clothes were ripped open? Shrugging his shoulders, Han Shao said with a face full of innocence, what does that have to do with me? You're the one who lost your mind and started dripping off your clothes. I controlled myself tightly and brought you here using cold water to revive your senses. I am an honorable gentleman, don't misunderstand me. Screw your honorable gentlemanliness, you despicable shameless profit-seeking knave. You held my hand last time and hugged me without even a word of apology. You purposely took advantage of me in the crack of the artificial mountains in the guild and didn't apologize. You've gone even further. Now I'm going to chase you to the depths of hell for this. Phoebe's face was full of wrath as she made threatening gestures and rushed at Hansha-Oh. Phoebe had obviously activated her fighting aura after coming to her senses this time. Hansha-Oh was startled and knew that Phoebe had most likely remembered her clothes being torn in front of her was from his hands. He hastily turned and scrambled up the riverbank, protesting his innocence along the way. "Miss Phoebe, listen to me." I also took in a breath of the aphrodisiac, causing my emotions to get out of control, but when I came to myself I immediately took you to this river. The heavens and earth are my witness, I really didn't take advantage of you. When you were still under the influence you also touched me all over and took advantage of me. Apart from you no other girl has ever touched me before. I'm still a virgin. I'll have scars deep in my heart after being violated by you. I've also suffered losses, let's say that we're even for this matter. Don't pursue it any further. As Hansha-Oh ran away the dreadly words shot out of his mouth like bullets. It was as if he'd returned to the time when Chu Kanglen had brought him to the moon and he let the old man have it with his words when Hansha-Oh lost his composure. Except it was insults last time and explanations this time. Shut up, you petty villain who should die 10,000 times. Stop saying nonsense. Phoebe's clothes were drenched through at this time and her wet hair exuded another type of allure, but her motions with her sword in her hands were quite violent. Forget it, count me unlucky. I'll be leaving now and will come find you for the black gold or after you've calmed down. Farewell. Hansha-Oh knew that there was no use in talking to Phoebe at this time. A woman who'd lost her senses was the scariest magical creature in the world, not to mention one who was a swordswoman. The danger of this to Hansha-Oh was on par with that of a super magical creature like a dragon. Sighing inside about how unlucky he was, Hansha-Oh didn't dare slow down his footsteps as he quickly rushed out, making for the direction of the cemetery and slowly leaving Phoebe, who was unfamiliar with the terrain, far behind. Chapter 74, The Little Skeleton That Wants to Soar and Fly. The first glimmers of dawn appeared in the sky after using the transportation matrix to return to the cemetery of death. One full day and night had elapsed since his departure and he hastened to move to the original demon cave and infuse more fresh blood and magical yuan, finally breathing a sigh of relief after he did so. The operation of the original demon cave must not be halted for even a day. If fresh blood and magical yuan weren't infused every day, then the work of the previous 20-some-odd days would be in vain. Planting his butt firmly on the ground, the fighting aura that had rushed into his body from Darnell's blow finally slowly started rampaging through his body. A sudden impact brought an upwelling of blood to Hansha-Oh's throat. He almost spat out a mouthful of fresh blood again. Happy instead of startled, he abruptly stood up and threw his head back in laughter. He quickly strode out of the cemetery of death towards the waterfall that he used to train his magic. Hansha-Oh braved the long river rushing down and sat down in his usual place. His body wobbling strongly in the beginning, Hansha-Oh quickly sank again into his training mode. For the next 7 days, apart from infusing the original demon cave with fresh blood and magical yuan at periodic intervals, Hansha-Oh stayed beneath the waterfall to train his magic. Hansha-Oh's strength improved in spades in the midst of harsh training. Leveraging the fighting aura that Darnell had left within his body and the violent force of the waterfall, Hansha-Oh reforged the meridians and bones of his chest, waist and stomach. When Hansha-Oh felt that Darnell's fighting aura no longer remained within him, he could clearly feel that his own body had emerged in an unprecedentedly better state. In the next few days, Hansha-Oh halted all magical training and spent his time looking after the original demon cave and studying the beginner magics of necromancy. He was now fully able to recite the latter from memory and had basically committed it to memory. Hansha-Oh had noted the parts in which he didn't understand. As he continued to use the round green ball to meditate, his mental strength grew with each passing day. Under his continual experimentation, he finally released the agony of the soul magic one day. Hansha-Oh was overjoyed and elated at that time. He understood that over the accumulation of several months and his greatly increased mental strength, he had finally graduated from the ranks of magic apprentice to being a novice mage. A novice mage in necromancy could grasp the 3 magics of agony of the soul, summon zombies and bone spears. Except after trying for quite a while, Hansha-Oh had only happened to cast agony of the soul by mistake. He was unable to release the other 2 magics of summoning zombies and bone spears ears no matter how he tried. He connected that fact to the other of not being able to understand many parts of the beginner magics of necromancy. Han Sha-o understood that only perusing books was not the fastest nor best way to increase his knowledge of magic. It looked like he should look for Fanny and inquire about the areas he didn't understand, as well as pick up the weapon forging materials that Phoebe had promised him along with the black gold ore. But before he'd return, Han Sha-o still planned to finishing refining the original demon. The original demon cave had been operating for a full 34 days and would be complete in 2 more days. Han Sha-o was in no rush to leave immediately and thus went to the dwarves' village to socialize with them. He came back to the mining cave again and mined for the entire day, obtaining a small piece of black iron ore and a couple pieces of iron and copper ore. Han Sha-o understood from Phoebe that black iron ore was a very rare and very valuable ore. He could often only obtain a very small piece after mining for an entire day. Therefore he directly stored the black iron ore within his space ring. When he returned to the cemetery of death afterwards, he threw all the iron and bronze ores into a space storage room within the Great Hall. Ha ha, this is interesting indeed. With these 3 original demons I have 3 extra pairs of eyes. If I let them loose I will no longer be afraid of being followed and ambushed. If I use the 3 original demons to assassinate others, it'll be an absolute nightmare for my enemies. Han Sha-o laughed wildly as he repeatedly used his will to release and withdraw the original demons from and into his body, practicing tirelessly. At this moment the little skeleton that had been lying in the original demon cave all along suddenly stood up, slowly climbing out of the pit. The 7 bone spurs on its back actually started flapping furiously as its body shot towards the sky with a strong push from its legs. The 7 bone spurs on its back were divided into 2 rows like the wings of an insect, with the remaining one pointing down at its butt like a tail. As it shot towards the air it capered shakily, with the 2 rows of bone spurs whirring furiously and its tail wagging continuously. It seemed to be the steering wheel of a bike in helping him move agilely through thin air. When the tail-like bone spur moved to the left, the little skeleton's body would also shift to the left. When the bone spur waved to the right, the little skeleton's body would fall to the right. It looked quite amazing. Han Sha-o was gobsmacked as he looked at the little skeleton descend in a wobbling fall, his face full of shock. He didn't know how to react in the span of that moment. After a while the little skeleton fell from midair with a crack as the bones of its body emitted a long string of creaking sounds. The little skeleton seemed to be dazed from the fall as it staggered around in circles after picking itself and the bone dagger up as if it was drunk. "Damn brat, you've only learned how to walk for a few days and now you want to fly?" Exclamation mark. Han Sha-o felt a deep pain in his heart as he looked at the little skeleton's current state. He hastily walked up to the little skeleton and knocked on the little skeleton's bright smooth forehead. An interesting thing happened. When Han Sha-o knocked down with his finger, the little skeleton immediately stopped its drunken staggering and sat down hard like a child. It even extended a finger to scratch its head, seemingly unable to comprehend what it did wrong. Han Sha-o had protected the little skeleton with great care ever since first being summoned by Han Sha-o. Under the continual refinement of his magical yuan, it started to display human-like behaviors. Han Sha-o's feelings towards the little skeleton was far more than those he felt for anyone else in this world. He was worried to death when he saw it fall from high up in the air. Han Sha-o breathed a sigh of relief when he verified with his own eyes that the little skeleton hadn't shattered and that it had only been rattled by the fall, with nothing else worse for the wear. After looking over it carefully, he suddenly realized that a few specks of dark red could be found within the inky blackness of the little skeleton's originally dark bones. It was no longer that pure deep black. If it wasn't for his careful gaze, he likely would have been hard-pressed to discover it. This is strange. The original demon cave was originally meant to refine a small demon chief. He purposefully squirmed his way in and even had an expression of leisurely enjoyment. His body had undergone some changes as soon as he left the pit and even wanted to imitate those demon generals in my body and fly. Looks like this brat has changed again. I wonder if these changes are for the better or for the worse. Even I don't know what this brat is now. Han Sha-o carefully stared at the little skeleton in close observation and muttered to himself, After a round of deep musings in which Han Shao realized that he couldn't understand the little skeleton's changes, he shook his head and thought no further. Looking at the now normal original demon cave, since the original demon general had emerged from it, Han Shao started an incantation and sent the little skeleton back to the other dimension. With his injuries recovered and the 3 original demons refined and even the little skeleton recovering its mobility, Han Shao traveled back to Awesome City through the transportation matrix when he thought of the incomprehensible magical knowledge and the black gold ore that Phoebe owed him for his services. Chapter 75, Close the Doors. You get in bed first. Awesome City, the Babylon Academy of Magic and Force. Han Shao ate breakfast and first bought a set of new clothes. Arriving at the academy later in the morning, he went to the library first and surreptitiously put back the 2 books of the Foundations of Necromancy and a magical dictionary that he had asked Jack to steal before. He then walked to Fanny's lab. The doors to the lab were open and Fanny was wearing black robes trimmed with gold, wearing a set of black framed glasses and holding a magic staff in her left hand. She held a pen in her right and was drawing some magical patterns on the pedestal in the center, explaining something with her speech. Next to her, Fitch had put on the appearance of conscientious listening, but his eyes often traveled over Fanny's face. Fanny had lost a few traces of her charming beauty with glasses on, but gained solemnness and the beauty of intellectuality. In Han Shao's eyes her beauty wasn't diminished at all, and he rather stared soulfully at her, mesmerized. Fanny delivered a string of words, then lifted her head to look at Fitch, who was busy staring off into space. She frowned. Fitch, do you understand? Fitch suddenly woke up from his musings and nodded, smiling. Master Fanny, you were very clear. I understand. When Fanny lifted her head to look at Fitch, she happened to see Han Shao standing in front of the door. Han Shao was now a bit taller than Fitch and his body was muscular and well defined due to continuous training and fighting. He stood there with his spine straight like a javelin, without the slightest bit of the usual frail external appearance that mages usually possessed. Fanny first blinked, a bit astonished by Han Shao's unnoticed changes, but when Fanny also saw Han Shao staring at her, mesmerized, her heart gave a leap and her face blushed red as well. Her right hand tightened on the pen and almost snapped the pen in two. What's wrong with me? Fanny said to herself and involuntarily took a deep breath, seeming to pout as she glared at Han Shao. She lifted her head to call out, long time no see, Brian. You've disappeared for a month after last time's training. Where have you been skulking around for so long that you only remembered to return now? Han Shao's mentality immediately returned to normal after hearing Fanny's words. He laughed lightly, not waiting for her to greet him, and strode purposefully into the room. He responded, last time's outing in the dark forest made me realize the many deficiencies in my abilities. That's why I borrowed a magic book and did some remedial studying on the foundational knowledge of magic. I've come to Master Fanny with some questions because I've encountered many difficulties. Huh, who would believe you? Exclamation mark, you're always so mysterious. Fanny rolled her eyes at Han Shao, obviously not believing his words. She turned her head to look at Fitch, suddenly feeling that his presence was irritating for some inexplicable reason. She instructed Fitch, I have a few more matters to discuss privately with Brian. Since you understood my explanation, you can go back and practice well. Fitch started. He hadn't seemed to think that Fanny would want him to leave because of Han Shao's appearance. He blanked for a while, then finally viciously glared at Han Shao, saying lowly, errand slaves will always be errand slaves. It's not like you've become a real student just because you put on the uniform. Fitch finally left after saying this. A smile was constantly apparent on Han Shao's face, completely oblivious to Fitch's low mutterings. Han Shao knew this was because of Fanny's attitude towards Fitch that caused Fitch to carry a grudge, but until Fitch took action to express his hatred, Han Shao couldn't be bothered to spend an ounce of strength on him. Go and close the door tightly. Fanny put down the pen and raked Han Shao with her gaze, instructing in an imposing manner as soon as Fitch had left. Close the doors? Han Shao's heart jumped, gazing upon Fanny with a deep and meaningful look. He displayed a trace of an odd smile, hastily got up and hastened to say, all right, I'll go close the doors. When Han Shao had jubilantly and gleefully closed the doors to the lab. Fanny raked Han-Sha-Oh with another gaze and continued instructing, "Get on the bed first." Nodding his head like a chicken pecking corn, Han-Sha-Oh didn't even bother saying much this time and directly shucked off his shoes, falling directly backwards on the white bed. He proudly crossed his legs and smiled. "Master Fanny, you come over as well." Fanny watched Han-Sha-Oh with an amused expression as her mouth closed with an audible click. "Come, close your eyes first." He had never been so docile as Han-Sha-Oh obediently closed his eyes, thinking dirty thoughts. A depraved smile blossomed on his face. "Ah!" A painful howl emitted from Han-Sha-Oh's mouth. He suddenly felt that a large surge of mental strength had invaded his mind, completely startlingly Han-Sha-Oh from his beautiful dreams. When Han-Sha-Oh saw that Fanny was gazing at him with a small smile, he asked with a hint of anger in his voice, "Master Fanny, what are you doing?" "Examining your body." "Didn't I say last time that you're the subject of my experiments and that I would use the school facilities to conduct a thorough examination on you when we return to the school, like I've just done?" "What did you think I wanted to do with you after closing the doors and make you lie on the bed?" Fanny spoke with a face full of seriousness and glared at Han-Sha-Oh, but even with glasses on they couldn't hide the proud smile in her eyes, one that was proud of successfully executing her scheme. The Han-Sha-Oh of now was not the Han-Sha-Oh of before. He immediately discerned the joy in Fanny's eye with one glance. He sat up with a wry smile and said, "Forget it, don't examine me in the future. These things can't be explained by rational logic. If you truly turn me into an idiot by intruding my mind that way, my life will be over." Fanny vaguely creased her brow in thought upon hearing Han-Sha-Oh's words and sighed involuntarily. After a bit of contemplation, she smiled. "Forget it then. I'm willing to lose an experimental subject but not a talented student." Seeing that Fanny was letting him off the hook so easily, Han-Sha-Oh heaved a huge sigh of relief and immediately thanked Fanny sincerely. He then took out the book of beginner magics of necromancy and started asking Fanny all the parts he didn't understand. Upon seeing Han-Sha-Oh withdraw the beginner magics of necromancy from his space ring and then seeing that many parts of the book had been highlighted and noted by Han-Sha-Oh, Fanny immediately looked askance at Han-Sha-Oh. She exclaimed lightly, "You're already reading this book? Have you grasped all the magics that magic apprentices should know? And you've taken a lot of notes. Looks like you really didn't slack off during this month. I've thought wrongly of you." "Of course I've already grasped the magics that magic apprentices should know." Han-Sha-Oh smiled. He thought for a moment and released the agony of the soul magic in front of Fanny. Fanny immediately said, "Oh my goodness, Brian, you're too amazing. You actually have enough mental strength to release the agony of the soul magic. This means that your mental strength has truly reached the level of a novice mage. You're a genius, a true genius." Han-Sha-Oh wasn't sure if he was a genius or not, but he knew that his mental strength could only improve so rapidly due to that odd green round ball. He still hadn't figured out what this green round ball was, but he was absolutely sure that it had something to do with the cemetery of death. After a string of surprised exclamations from Fanny, Han-Sha-Oh started seriously asking Fanny all his questions about magical knowledge that he didn't know. As an adept mage, Fanny's constant homework had always been to teach students how to understand magic and was very familiar with this foundational knowledge. She went out of her way to resolve all of Han-Sha-Oh's difficult questions. During the process, the two were quite close to each other and Han-Shu could smell the fragrance wafting off of Fanny's body. Their gazes would interlock during explanations and have a sense of mutual admiration due to shared enlightenment. Fanny didn't feel distaste at Han-Sha-Oh being so close to her and would actually clap his shoulder as she complimented him whenever he clearly understood one of her explanations. Time passed unknowingly in Fanny's lab. The two of them had conversed for several hours, yet Fanny wasn't the slightest bit impatient. She seemed rather delighted and would never be bored because she had met a good student. It wasn't until when the bells started ringing that Fanny came to herself with a shock. When she recovered her senses, she said lightly, "Oh no, I almost forgot that I still needed to preside over class at the training fields later this afternoon." "Brian, your comprehension abilities are very high. Looks like you've chosen the right path in learning necromancy magic, but let's stop here for today. I'm going to the training fields to teach my class. Do you want to come with me?" Shaking his head, Han-Sha-Oh smiled. "I'd rather not. I've already thoroughly grasped some of the lower level magics. I've understood from you today many of the things that I didn't previously understand and need some time to carefully think about them. I won't be going to the training fields." Nodding, Fanny didn't press further and hastily cleaned up the lab. She picked up a book, adjusted her collar and said, "That works too. You can come meet with me in private in the next couple of days and I'll help you go over the areas that you don't understand." "Oh, right." Lisa seems to have been very worried that you were gone for so long. She asked me where you went. Hey, I haven't been up to much. Please tell her not to worry. I'll be going now and will come disturb you quite often in the next few days. "Thank you in advance, Master Fanny," Han Sha-oh said carelessly and left before Fanny left her lab. He thought for a bit, avoided the crowded areas and started walking outside the academy. After leaving the academy, Han Sha-oh circled past two roads very carefully, finally making his way towards Phoebe's residence. Han Sha-oh vaguely felt that he was in a bad place after the assassination at the Boost Merchant Guild. Not only had he offended Grover, but it was likely that even Phoebe held a grudge against him, but for the black gold, or Han Sha-oh had to grit his teeth and come find Phoebe again. He only hoped that the past 10 or so days had been enough to calm her temper. The same old butler answered the door again, with Fabian coming by shortly after Han Sha-oh had walked in because he'd heard the news. He still wore a faint smile when he saw Han Sha-oh, saying, "Brian, how come you have time to swing by today?" Smiling wryly, Han Sha-oh shook his head and sighed. "Don't mention it. I helped your young miss assassinate Darnell and Una in the Boost Merchant Guild last time, but somehow offended your Miss Phoebe. Not only did I receive no compensation, but she actually beat me up. Terribly unlucky." "Oh, although Miss Phoebe comes from a wealthy family, she isn't the type to throw a tantrum without cause." "What happened between you and Miss Phoebe?" "After she came back in the dead of the night that day, she spent the next couple of days being angry. I happened to overhear her curse you as despicable, shameless and disgusting. I truly don't understand what could have happened for her to be in such a terrible mood." Fabian looked at Han Sha-oh with confusion, saying slowly as he seemed deep in thought. His face wry. Han Sha-oh sighed slowly once again. "Forget it, let's not mention those things again. I have to find her again for my materials." "Is Miss Phoebe home right now?" "Apologies, the miss is out and temporarily not available, but I think she'll return shortly, so if you're not in a hurry you can wait here a bit." "Alright then, I'll wait for her for a bit." Indeed, Han Sha-oh's ear caught the sound of someone knocking at the door from far away after waiting for a short while. As his heart started to agitate with unease, he privately weighed up what he should say to Phoebe when he saw her later. Just as Han Sha-oh's brow was deeply furrowed in thought, a man's voice sounded lightly. "You're Brian, what are you doing here?" Han Sha-oh started and immediately lifted his head, realizing that the warrior Lawrence, who had spent 5 gold coins to hire him as a human target last time in the Warriors Academy, was standing at the door with Phoebe. "Senior brother Lawrence, you know him?" Outside the door, Phoebe looked at Lawrence astonished as she asked in surprise. "Of course, he's Brian, the errand boy from our academy," Lawrence answered matter-of-factly. "Errand boy?" Phoebe and Fabian both exclaimed at the same time. Phoebe measured up Han Sha-oh with an odd look as she asked Lawrence, "Senior brother, your Babylon Academy of Magic and Force is the most renowned school throughout the Empire. Why would such a despicable, shameless and disgusting person be present?" Lawrence started upon hearing these words and shrugged his shoulders at Han Sha-oh, smiling at Phoebe. "Little junior sister, how did Brian offend you?" "I rather admire his tenacious and unyielding personality." Han Sha-oh's face was wry as he sat there without a word, drinking tea with a lowered head, one sip after another. He privately reflected that he was in quite the pickle. He hadn't thought that Lawrence would be Phoebe's senior brother. Now that his identity had been revealed, if Phoebe wanted to pursue previous events, it would be troublesome for even him to avoid this.